going around the world in 80 days, that's not a big deal now, but it was crazy to be able to do that back then.
And no one had ever even tried going all the way around the world yet. And in 80 days, I mean, it was pretty brave of Nellie to come up with this idea to do, especially with the time period.
The
Did they book their own passage and everything? Did they book their passage, the boat trip and the train trips? Did they book it or did the newspaper book it?
Nellie actually, when she originally came to the editor, she had her whole trip planned out. All she would have to do is buy the tickets, and so she was ready to go the next day.
She had even researched like the schedules of all of them. And so Nellie was very well prepared for the trip. Elizabeth Bislin, on the other hand, was told 6 hours before she left that she was leaving on this trip. And so she just got on the train and was just like, okay, when I get here, I need to find a boat to here. And she just, that's probably why she came later than Nellie, because it wasn't as well planned out.
It was only 4 days, that's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not bad, really.
I have a question for Neil, since he doesn't seem to get a word in edgewise. And this is not particularly about your study, but talk to me, Neil, about working with a 3-year veteran and a 2-year veteran in History Fair.
I think it helped me a lot because they both knew a lot about History Fair, and they were able to teach me how to get sources, how to organize them, like how to prepare myself for the competition.
Speaking of sources, which primary sources were most helpful to you, and were there any things that were surprising in that?
I think the best primary source we had was there is a collection of letters that Elizabeth Bislin left to Tulane University, because that was the city she was from. And it was after she moved to Europe, she kept writing back to her friend back in America, and she had all of the letters and left them to Tulane. And so whenever we first started researching Elizabeth Bislin, that collection popped up, and we were like, oh cool, we'll call the library and they'll email some copies to us. And they're like, no, you have to come here if you want to see them. And coincidentally, my older brother Scott went on a college visit over Thanksgiving break, so we went with him and went to the library while he was on the tour. And it was so cool. We had to go in this room and lock up all our stuff in the lockers so we couldn't steal any of them. And
White gloves and all.
yeah, well, we didn't actually have to wear white gloves, but they came out with like 5 these huge boxes, and you could only take 1 file out of the box at a time and 1 letter out of the box, and it took like all day, but it was so cool because these weren't copies, these were the original paper she had written on. And it was just so cool seeing her handwriting. It was so delicate, and it was this fancy cursive. It was so hard to read, but it was just really cool.
The most important source for me was there was this book called 80 Days by Matthew Goodman, and he got their trip and kind of put it into like a novel so we could get to understand their personalities better, what they would do, how they would act. And another good source was we interviewed Matthew Goodman, and he kind of helped us understand some things we didn't understand about the book.
What I think another really important primary source is the newspaper articles that Nellie Bly and Elizabeth Bislin both wrote, because one of the very important things that we wanted to do in our performance is show how different these 2 women were, but how they were both fighting for the same thing. And so these articles that they would write perfectly portrayed who they were and just how they would act, and just everything about them was in their writing, just the way they wrote. Nellie was very straightforward, and actually in my monologue I say a quote from her, and she's talking about her trip to the insane asylum, and she just says, I said I could, and I would, and I did. So that's very, very straightforward. And she's just a very, very bold person, while Elizabeth Bislin is very descriptive and dainty, and she likes to just make her writing a lot more beautiful looking, and it's just, she uses very fanciful words.
Like for every noun, there was 5 adjectives. And actually, the first sentence I say in Elizabeth Bisland's monologue was the opening sentence to her book about the trip. And originally, the first sentence in her book was like 3 lines long, and it was just on and on. It was like, if on the 13th of November some amateur prophet foretold I'd be spending Christmas Day of that year in the waters that wash the shores of the Indian Empire, I hope I should call to attention the quote from the book of something on page 33, blah, 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 the Lord loveth the cheerful liar. It was just so long. She would just describe everything. And so whenever we were writing, it was very hard to write my monologue because we wanted to show how she would have said it, but it had to fit into our time limit.
Which, by the way, is 9 minutes and 35 seconds.
Yay.
Good job.
How often did you guys rehearse your play?
Not very, well, we all have very, very busy schedules,
Oh my
and
gosh,
so we would try to get together at least twice a week.
And as it got towards the dates that
It
history fair
got
was,
more
we got
often.
more often.
Like, like right after regionals, we really didn't practice that much because we had
Until
like 3 months.
yeah.
And so we would like practice once a week and get together and talk about what we wanted to change. And then we would change it, and then eventually we would start rehearsing with first just the set, and then like in the last week, we would use the costumes. But these costumes are very hot, and there's a lot of stuff on it, so we wouldn't rehearse with them a lot.
Paige, you made an interesting comment.
Dad.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, what over there? What different types of transportation did they take besides trains and ships?
That was it.
That was pretty much it.
They didn't do anything different?
Unless it was like a little cab from the boat station to the train station. That was mostly it.
No wagons, no horse.
Probably,
Stagecoach?
it was probably a little bit of that from like the,
Oh yeah,
But
when they
from one station to another.
Their longest,
No,
like the main way that they would get around is by ship and by steam train.
Mhm.
biggest distance.
There were, both of you played distinct characters. Neil, how were you able to develop characters? What did you have to go on?
Well, it was hard for me to develop my character because my characters are, except for my paperboy, they're men, and it was hard for me to act like one with a deep voice, and they were grumpy, so I had to get that angry personality.
Were you Mr. Pemberton?
In
Yeah.
the very end, I was Mr. Pulitzer.
We never state that, but he's just kind of representing all of the people that agreed with this trip and thought what they did was
Yeah.
awesome.
What did they go on to do with their lives?
Well, Nellie continued writing, and she just was soaking in every minute of her glory and her fame. And then after that, she did a lot of like undercover reporting. So she would pretend to be a person, like Neil said. She posed as a woman in a factory, and just to expose all these horrible conditions, primarily of women. But she wasn't really able to do that.
Because everyone knew who
Because,
she was.
yeah, everyone knew who she was, and they were on the lookout to make sure that she wasn't going to come expose something that the company
trying
or
to
the group
hide.
didn't want the public to know. And so she ended up doing a lot more stunt reporting, and so she would go spend the night in a haunted house, or she tamed a tiger. So she would do more fun, interesting things, but she still would write articles about the hardships of women and the conditions that they were living in.
Y'all mentioned that they did get a chance to interview Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Do you think that helped?
She interviewed Susan B. Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony. Did that help, you think, in bringing forward the vote? I mean, can we safely say that?
Well,
was part of it?
Elizabeth Bisland didn't interview her because she was in Europe, but Nellie Bly
Nellie
did.
Bly did.
After her trip.
Yeah.
Yes, I definitely think that was just another way to get the word out there by a very well-known person, Susan B. Anthony, and it was being written by a very well-known person, Nellie Bly, and so that was just more that was just another way to get the word out. Yeah, get the idea out there, and it talked about a lot of interesting points that you wouldn't really think of, and about just why women should get the vote.
Yes.
The song you sing in the beginning, was that song written about Nellie Bly?
It was made before she actually got her job as a reporter. It's about a house slave named Nellie Bly who cleans the house and stuff.
And Nellie Bly is actually a pen name. It's not her real name. Her original name is Elizabeth Cochran. And when she came to the World newspaper, when she just first started writing, it wasn't right to put your name if you were a woman. It wasn't right to put your name in the newspaper. And so she came up with the fake name, and this song was like the jam at the time, and so she changed her pen name to Nellie Bly.
Because it was something that everyone knew, and it would catch people's eye and be like, oh, wait, I know that name, I should read it.
Yes.
That's what your introduction was.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And we were gonna put that it was a pen name in our production, but it was very confusing with Elizabeth Bisland, Elizabeth Cochran, Mr. Cockerel, Mr. Cochran. It was just too much.
Yeah.
It would be very confusing to have all that in there. Yes.
In your research, did you run across how much the newspapers expended on financing the trips?
What did they pay y'all?
Yeah, I think it was a volunteer. I don't think they got paid to do
How
this.
much did it cost to travel around the world?
Oh, I don't even know how much it would cost.
But I know that they would spend tons of money they spent tons of money publicizing the trip to get everyone to hear about this. And actually, Nellie became so famous that when she actually came to the United States in California, she was able to pretend to drive the train across the United States. Yeah. And there were just crowds cheering for her at every stop. And when she got back to New York, everyone was wearing the Nellie Bly coat and the signature Nellie Bly hat. And so she was just one of the most famous people.
Who made it? Who made your coat?
Oh, well, actually, Miss Connie made my costume and my coat.
I would like to know if either woman got married.
They both got married, and they were both married to older men. These two women lived very, very parallel lives, and we just thought it was so crazy that they never even wanted to meet each other. Like, they both got back from the trip, married an older man, then the man died, and they were both widowed, and then they both died of the same disease, pneumonia, and they're buried in the same cemetery.
And that's all by coincidence.
Wow.
Yeah, and they both never had children, and so.
Which of the two reporters do you think would be the most successful in society today?
I think
I would say Nellie, because she was
more willing to go.
And she was more popular and do because everyone wants to read a story about taming a tiger. Nobody wants to read a 3-page story about women's issues.
Yeah. And I think Nellie just had a more bold way of writing. She just wrote, she was very, 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 very opinionated. And Elizabeth Bisland, don't get me wrong, she was opinionated too, but she
said it in a nicer way.
Yeah, Nellie Bly would just put it straight lay it on the table. And so I think that she would just be more popular in today's society.
In the first scene, we showed Nellie Bly convincing her editor to send her on this trip. And I think if Elizabeth Bisland, if the roles were switched, I think Elizabeth would have invited her editor over for tea and talked him into it, been okay, so I heard the blah, 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 what about this? Instead of send me right now. I'm ready to go today.
One more question. Neil, when you did your angry guy character, did you model that